It's time to get sexy on Secular Sexuality.
Hello and welcome to Secular Sexuality, the ACA show reminding you that it's just a jump to the left and then a step to the right. My co-hosts this week are everyone's favorite androgynous cat cyborg, Vila Bianca.
Meow.
And here about the reaping is a Miss Death or something, Miss Serafina Smith.
Death needs no introduction, Christy.
Well, happy Halloween and welcome to our fall holiday mailbag, where we spend the whole episode answering your questions.
And if you are interested in asking us questions tonight, feel free to call in at 512-991-9242 or toll free online at tiny.cc/callsex. We have open lines and we'd love to hear from you as we read through these emails that we got. If you want to contribute to our next mailbag episode, which should be happening in a couple of months, feel free to email us at sex@atheist-community.org or go to our Facebook page that's run by fans, and no doubt we will have our mods posting up queries there as well.
All right, well, let's jump into it. Sarah, what is that first email?
I have a mail from a listener who would like to speak, and so I will deliver this. She says, if a person such as myself, who is a transgender woman who has a penis, is attracted sexually to specifically people with vaginas, what kind of sexual orientation would this be? I am very bad with labels, and when asked about this, I generally tend to say I am psychologically lesbian, but biologically straight, which is very likely the wrong way to put it, but I cannot find better words or terms yet. I acknowledge that both gender and sex are spectrums, but the way to define a sexual orientation still eludes me. I'm trying my best to educate myself when it comes to these issues, as I have to personally deal with them every day as well.
I missed death. Not everyone can say that, but
that's very on brand for you, V. I feel like that's nobody in the chat is like, what?
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, I don't know, Christy, where are you coming from with this one?
Yeah, I tend to believe that our orientation language is reflexive on our own gender. And we can talk about whether or not that's useful. I've tried very unsuccessfully on this show to convince people that we should be using words like gynophilic or phallophilic instead of gay or straight. But that's never going to catch on because it might be very terrible. That being said, when we talk about being a lesbian, we're generally assuming that we are women and the people we're attracted to are women, regardless of their parts. And so I think that that's the word that applies here. But I don't want to speak out of school with the two of y'all. I'd love to hear how you experience these ideas.
Yeah, well, for me, I really like the term sapphic. When talking about identities sexually that or orientations that prefer women or feminine presenting people, because that kind of takes you out of the equation. So it doesn't really matter what your gender is or where you are on that spectrum. If you are sapphic, that means that you have a specific type of person you're attracted to. But there's also a very large community of bisexual lesbians and Enby lesbians and people who do not identify as cis women who also are lesbians. identities. And a lot of the discourse around that I've heard is a lesbian means not attracted to men. So that could be somebody who's attracted to women and non-binary people, or women and they themselves are, regardless of their gender. If you are attracted to not men, then you can call yourself a lesbian, according to many of these more open and less gatekeepy online circles. That's always going to get pushback, especially from more gender critical or turfy kind of crowds. So I don't think there's a win-win here where you'll find a word that everyone agrees is like, oh yeah, clearly that is what you are, because the community doesn't work like that, unfortunately. But I think that you could very easily call yourself a lesbian. You could call yourself just sapphic if you would like. But yeah, you certainly do not have to be a cis woman in order to be a lesbian.
I would like to add that if you are attracted to people with a certain anatomy, I do not understand why you would be attracted to anyone, since you cannot see their anatomy until you are having relations with them. But I think that if you are attracted to women and you are a woman or anything along those lines, that a lesbian is just fine if you wish. Sapphic is also a very good word. None of it really matters in the end, though. We're all heading for the same place.
That is a really good point, though, Death, that you make, that there is this tendency to say, oh, I'm attracted to people with a certain, anatomy or genitalia, and kind of that's making some assumptions about the people that you're seeing, because I'm assuming that unless you're actively looking at porn, like, you're not going to people and your first impression is looking at their genitalia.
What's in your pants?
Right.
Not in polite society.
So yeah, that's a very good point as well. Is it actually the anatomy, or is it, other stuff about them that actually attracts you? But yeah, I think if you want to call yourself a lesbian, you can. There doesn't need to be an asterisk by it. And sapphic is always a good term to use as well.
Well, and I should add here, if not already, that the emails that we're reading are in many times kind of cut down and maybe shortened to get to the point and just make for better air. Only to say that I do think that a little bit of that was discussed in the original email. So I definitely don't want to seem as if we're mischaracterizing anybody's comments, while also just trying to get to some of the deep idea around some of these things.
Oh, for sure. These are all very amazing questions, but also jumping off points for larger conversations.
Mm-hmm. Well, from there, V, if you'd like to jump in with the next one.
Sure. And I feel remiss at not having a cat cyborg voice to put on for this. But this is
always a cat cyborg voice.
I'll take it. I will take it.
Are you a cat cyborg? Then you have a cat cyborg voice, right?
Ooh. Damn, I opened myself up to that one. All right, Lost Red Bear says, I know you all did an episode on asexuality a while back. Sorry if I'm tilting, I can only see on one eye. I know you did an episode on asexuality a while back, and I was thrilled to see aces get some focus, but I couldn't help but wish Aegosexuality had been discussed as well. You may already be familiar with it, but just in case you're not, Aegosexuality is a subset of asexuality. The term essentially means anti-ego, as in disconnecting from yourself from the sexual things you enjoy. So here's a quick overview. Aegosexuals are known to get aroused by sexual content at times, but not actually want to personally engage in those sexual activities. Masturbate, but feel neutral or repulsed by the idea of having sex with another person. Fantasize about sex with varying frequency, but envision people other than themselves and or view it in the third person as though they're watching it on TV rather than imagining the first person. Predominantly or entirely fantasizing about fictional characters or celebrities rather than people they know in real life, and identify as asexual feel little to no sexual attraction to people, but enjoy masturbating, are aroused by sexually explicit content, and or have sexual fantasies. So this writer says, as an ego myself, I really hope you can touch on this in a future episode if possible. I think it's important to raise awareness for it because so many people who would identify as it have no idea that it's a thing. This can lead to people feeling as though they either aren't entirely welcome or are imposters within the broader ACE community, mistakenly thinking that they have porn addictions or generally just feeling like they're perverts or that there's something wrong with them. Oh, and the last thing, the ego prefix can obviously apply to romantic as well. For example, I very much enjoy romance as a concept in movies, literature, or for the people around me, despite not having much interest in it myself. Thanks for your consideration on this, and I love the show. So, what do you guys think about this one?
Well, the last thing that I want to do is like brush off our hands and say, well, done, we covered it. But I do really love that breakdown. And I hope that there are folks in the audience who are having that kind of light bulb moment of saying like, oh, maybe this is something I need to investigate. And I'll make sure that there are some links and references in the show notes to this episode for anybody who's starting to maybe see themselves reflected in some of this. What about y'all?
Etymologically speaking, I hate the word. I know a bit about Latin because it is a dead language, and, well, I don't like this combination, but as a label, it seems fine. It's just the enjoyment of sex, a sexual libido or interest that has nothing to do specifically with oneself. I've not encountered this in living people, so I have little to say about it, but I hope that you will enjoy your labels while you can.
One of my very best friends from undergrad identifies as ego. And I know Z was extremely excited at discovering this label because it was also that moment of being like, oh, I'm not crazy. This is a label. This is something people are, and this is something I can apply to myself. And that's so useful. I also feel very much empathy for this position and people in this position just because it feels very much like non-binariness and the bi-pan spectrum, where it's somewhere in the middle, kind of in popular culture. It's like it's not quite one thing, it's not quite another thing. There's some flexibility there, and so a lot of people tend to discount it as a phase or as pretending or as, you know, you're not really this thing. And so it can be really rough to be in a position where you want to find that community, and there's a purity test of some kind that you have to pass before you can get in and be accepted. So I think it's a totally valid identity. If that's what describes you and that's what works for you, go for it. And having that label out there hopefully will help other people to find you and find each other.
Yeah, and I want to point out that the writer highlights the fact that this is part of the ACE community. And while that's what we're talking about Aegosexual, I hope that it encourages some people to recognize that that form of dissociation, that sort of out-of-body sexuality, is also a phenomenon. You know, that there is a reasonable experience of enjoying sex without necessarily seeing your own ego as part of it, whether that's your entire sexuality or if that's just a piece of it. There's a lot of fun things to explore that I want to make sure to remind people of. So from here, we've got a stack of great calls already coming in. Did y'all have a favorite that you want to get started with?
Can I ask that we talk to Patricia? Patricia was on my stream earlier, and I want to say hi.
Absolutely. Patricia, what can we do for you?
Hello. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Thanks for calling in.
So, yeah. So basically, my best friend has a younger sister who is high school age. She's recently been watching a lot of anime, which, you know, plenty of people do. And my partner recently started watching some of the same shows that our friend's sister has been watching and noticed a bit of a troubling pattern in these shows, that they have a lot of scenes that are sexual in nature and very much blur the lines of consent or are overtly non-consensual scenes. And I know that consensual non-consent is a kink that some people are into, and that's cool. But I'm just worried because she is young, she's in high school, and I want to make sure that she has access to resources to know how to go about that in a safe way if that's something she's interested in. But I'm also not super close to her, so I'm trying to figure out how to talk to my friend about it in a way that she could talk to her sister about it.
Well, that's definitely a difficult position to be when you see a need, but are kind of stuck in that daisy chain position. And yeah, we can get a fire brigade together and, you know, we can do this show and try to give out a bunch of good information and links and resources. And then you can take it and try to hand it off, and then they can try to hand it off, which, you know, I certainly want to attempt. But I just want to acknowledge how difficult it is when there's that much distance. Is there, you know, much space for the people in her life to approach her about these things?
So her sister is pretty open. They seem to have a pretty good relationship. And she definitely has, I think, the younger sister is involved in like the GSA at her high school. So she's definitely exposed to kind of queer, sex positive views, which is good. But I don't know, outside of that, I'm not really sure.
Sure. Well, I don't know about the two of y'all, but I can't help but feel like rather than focusing on consensual non-consent and these like different forms of sexuality, it may be best to just start with the genuine article and sort of highlight the necessary elements of consent. And then point out what is consent, what's not consent, and anything that gets rolled into that, I think, will kind of help clear this up. I would definitely point you towards Sex Positive Families. Sexpositivefamilies.com is a great resource with a number of different books and videos and articles and all kinds of things about how to have these kinds of conversations. But I'm curious what the two of y'all might be seeing in all this.
I believe that a viewing party is in order. You sit, or their sister sits and watches the favorite hentai together, and, well, they can then, when such nastiness comes upon the screen that you people like to do, can refer to it and speak of discomfort or comfort and consent and lack of thereof.
That's certainly an option. I also, seeing sexual content on screen as a family and destigmatizing that, I think by itself is a useful thing. I bond with way too many people over the idea of like having a sex scene on TV and like, oh, my parents are in the room. This is terrifying and awful.
Yeah, or like literally putting a blanket over the TV for certain scenes, or like fast forwarding when somebody gets uncomfortable. Like that kind of messaging is way more harmful. I'm not saying that you should watch, you know, a very hot sex scene in an R-rated movie with your 8-year-old, but you probably shouldn't be watching an R-rated movie with your 8-year-old. That's maybe more the concern there.
Yeah, so I think the larger conversation here needs to be like Christy said, around consent in general. Trust your friend's kid. Trust that you said daughter, is going to be able to tell the difference once she has the information, right? And so the only thing that you can do, the only thing you could even possibly be expected to do, is to advocate for the dissemination of information for her. And then what she is going to do with that is really up to her and her parents. But as long as you are comfortable talking about consent and you talk with your friend about maybe getting her the resources she needs, that's really the most you can do probably in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, my partner and my friend, we're all very sex positive people. So when her sister's been around us, I think she's definitely experienced that. I think it's just something that, maybe she as a sister doesn't necessarily want to talk about. She's her younger sister, but I don't know. I definitely don't feel like it's my place to have that conversation. So.
Yeah, if it comes up organically in any kind of way, I do think that somebody outside of the family can really do a favor by not necessarily having the family stigma attached to them and all of these kinds of things. But I think it's almost doubly true then that by trying to force it, you can make things a whole lot worse because you don't necessarily have that built-in family, I guess we have to talk about this kind of thing. So, I'm not going to say at all that you shouldn't approach her. I would like to live in a world where people are more comfortable and more equipped to approach their own children about these things, because ultimately I do feel like that's where the primary responsibility should be falling here. But we certainly don't live in that world, especially not here in the States. So whatever you can offer, whatever you can suggest, just know that this is not your responsibility. And I hear that in your voice. I hear that you are just seeing a need and wanting to be as available as possible. But I hope that that doesn't come with a sense of obligation that isn't warranted.
Yeah, I think it's just, I know that she and my friend were both raised very Mormon. So she's kind of got this super extreme, don't even think about sex or that's a sin sort of perspective. And then to her sister, who's a very, very out lesbian and does not give two shits what anyone thinks about her sexuality. So I'm hoping that means she has some access to different ideas, but
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. That is a protective factor in a lot of ways, which is a strange thing to say. But the reality is our queer youth are having to self-educate. And in doing so, they're picking up potentially some harmful ideas. But I have to feel more hopeful than that. I see so many success stories, and I'm always incredibly impressed when I work with my teenage clients. The understanding that they have of vocabulary, of different signals and all of these different terms, it's really remarkable. And so while you can never just sort of sit back, I feel hopeful. And I'm glad to hear that she is able to express herself and identify in that way. And that she's got people like you in her life looking out for her, or at least expressing concern.
Yes, Bible Black is perhaps not the most excellent sexual education, but it is better at least than the Texas Board of Education.
This is
Zing
true.
and true. So I'll point you again
New York,
towards
so they legally have to get good stuff.
Well, I'll point you again towards Sex Positive Families and make sure that link is in the show notes for this episode. But I hope that gives you just a little bit of insight. I know it's a really tricky thing to kind of walk into.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for calling. You have a great night.
Thanks, Patricia.
Be seeing you.
Thanks, you too.
That's so dark, Sarah. I love it.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing.
Well, let's take a moment to jump back into the emails.
Yeah, Christy, do you want to take one?
Yeah, I've got one here. Okay. This is my 5th attempt at a message because I want to get to my point and also not come off as an a-hole and a bigot.
Oh dear.
But
Oh,
yeah,
no.
it's a concern. But it is slowly dawning on me that I need to be rather blunt. For the record, these are not my opinions. These are opinions I keep coming across from others when trying to discuss any sort of sexual roleplay. The next several passages are in quotation marks. People who engage in pet play, well, they just want to simulate bestiality. People who engage in age play, well, they just want to simulate pedophilia. People who engage in BDSM relationships, well, the bottom clearly has suffered some sort of trauma and someone needs to save them from someone who clearly derives pleasure from inflicting pain in others. That top should be locked away because clearly they could not feasibly be a productive member of society.
Oof.
Yeah. So the writer says, again, those are not my opinion, but, well, I do kind of see where people who say those things might be coming from. I don't agree with them, but I see where they're coming from.
Lots of cushioning there.
Yeah, I really hope I captured the tone in my dramatic reading.
That was beautiful.
Well, I have to say the quotation marks are doing a lot of heavy lifting there, aren't they? Like it definitely it comes across a little bit. But yeah, I have to say that when I see these kinds of questions, especially when they are seemingly coming from sort of a bad faith position, it really does concern me because I think that people need to recognize that our thoughts, our dreams, our fantasies, our fears, our nightmares, these kinds of emotions aren't necessarily under our control. And that doesn't say anything about who we are as people. You know, there's such a difference between wanting to fantasize about some of these experiences like consensual non-consent, or play video games like Call of Duty where we're murdering, watching movies like John Wick where there's violence, wanting to express that emotion or feel that feeling in some kind of way is not at all akin to wanting to actually act out abuse or harm on somebody else. How do y'all kind of just like stomach all of this? Like, how does it just hit you in your nervous system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in another life, I would have been compelled by these comments. Like, I aggressively conservative household. And so for me, there is definitely that initial, oh, that's weird. Something's happening.
Yeah, so there is that.
But essentially, what I'm saying here is, we could use that same logic to do something like blame psychopaths because they like to experience what it's like to almost die by falling off a cliff. Like, why do we do anything that we do? It's to stimulate our nervous systems, right? And it's to give us the ability to feel things that otherwise we wouldn't feel or get to experience. And sex is no different. It's just another thing that we're doing in order to experience things. And of course, that requires consent. But as long as that consent is there, then I really don't see the need to worry about what internal motivation someone might have for a particular kink. It's their kink. No shame here.
Mm-hmm.
Like the writer, I too think I know where they are coming from. They are coming from a visceral reaction where they have, let us call it a trigger to certain activities. And naturally, when something triggers that because of some appearance of hilarity, well, it will simply cause one to feel that aversion. So naturally, one must push back against it, must one? Isn't that how you people do things? You fear them and then you push against them.
I feel like death has been pushed quite a bit, sounds like. I think
Thing.
Well, it's fair to say some of this can be uncomfortable. You know, I want to be gentle and kind when we recognize that the recent episode we did exploring age play definitely pushed a lot of buttons. And I hope that we handle that sensitive material in a responsible way while informing people and seeking to destigmatize these things, while recognizing that it can be pretty uncomfortable in a culture that is not well equipped to have these conversations.
also, it's worth noting that the BDSM community in general and a lot of these role play, kink communities have such a better understanding of consent and negotiation and autonomy than what we would consider to be vanilla or pretty mainstream traditional sex. There is so much more conversation happening. There is so much more respect for boundaries and conversation about what you liked, what you didn't like, what we should do next time. Let's work up to this, or let's try that. It feels like if you're coming at it from a perspective of, well, I don't really talk about sex with my partners, therefore they probably don't, and then this could enter into dangerous territory. You're right. This kind of thing shouldn't be done without negotiation and consent and communication. But you have to understand there's a very different culture around these communities where that is constantly talked about and constantly scrutinized to make sure that everybody is comfortable and having a good time.
Yeah, those are incredible points. I just want to, I think, highlight that the best way to have safe sex, how we choose to define that, is to be in community, to be actively engaging with other people in conversation about what feels safe, about what feels appealing, about what feels right. And I think that that is very different than the way that we are encouraged or raised in this country. And I want to be mindful of that. I'm not necessarily saying that everybody needs to go to work tomorrow and ask their boss about their sex life, but I also want to encourage people, even if very few of the things we talk about on this show, kink and BDSM and pet play and these different kinds of ideas don't interest you, I hope that you still find other avenues and outlets and opportunities to talk about your sexuality, whether that's incredibly vanilla or something that's potentially a little bit more dangerous or challenging.
Awesome. Do we want to take another call before we jump into the next email?
Yeah, who are you looking at?
The next email kind of ties into Katie's call from PA. Do you want to talk with Katie?
Yeah, let's jump in.
All right. Hi, Katie. Welcome to the show. How can we help you tonight?
Hello. This has been on my mind for a while, and I'm not trying to sound bigoted, because it is the biggest sounding question I can think of, even though I'm not trying to sound that way. So please, I apologize if it does come off that way. I'm trying to figure out, how would anybody feel any type of gender? What does a gender feel like? Because I don't attribute gender to the parts or anything like that. So, and I don't attribute people to exactly girls must like pink or something. So I'm I've been having difficulty understanding it.
Sure. It is a difficult thing to pin down. It's a very loose construct. I like to liken it to music genre. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're playing a guitar or drums, or if you are playing horns or a violin. The genre of music is kind of this intangible, I don't know what about it, but we all kind of recognize that there are some consistent themes and some things that we can tend to lump into a particular direction. I know that that's not especially helpful when examining your gender, but I would ask you to just be curious about what types of things trigger those gendered feelings in me, or what type of maybe gendered things or things that our culture likes to gender resonate or don't resonate with me. When I was getting ready for this episode, even though I don't conventionally wear makeup, I had to say it tickled a part of my brain that doesn't often get maybe nourished in the way that it should. And I personally, for myself, recognize that as being a part of my feminine gender that I don't maybe express in ways that I should like to. Now, that being said, your gender may be a gender, which can make it even more difficult to maybe wrap your head around.
Yeah, that is always the first thing that I want to clarify whenever this question comes up. If there is a real just kind of mental block and you're like, I don't feel gender, what does it mean to feel gender? It could very well be that you don't need one. And that's absolutely okay. And I don't want to make that assumption about you. That might be something that you've considered and rejected, or that might be something you need to sit with for a while, but that's an option. If you really are not interested in it, if you don't get it, if it doesn't apply to you, that's also a thing, and that's totally okay. I also like to liken gender to personality traits and things like what would you say being creative feels like? You know, there's no particular definition for what being creative feels like, and you can be creative in a myriad of different ways. There's no one way to be creative, but there are a lot of people who use that label for themselves and feel that that describes them really well and gives them a place in society. Gender is not something external to us, something objective out there like a platonic ideal that we are accessing and talking about. The way we talk about gender is just the way we use words to talk about ourselves. And some words have social connotations that make us feel comfortable or uncomfortable. For me, there are very many things about being feminine that I enjoy and love and celebrate in myself. But there are connotations to words like woman or girl or ma'am that just make me, ugh, right? And the same thing with, traditionally masculine titles. Those don't feel quite right either. And so following that sense of who am I, what words work for me, is really where my journey led me. And that is going to look different for everyone. There can be cis women or binary trans women, anywhere on that binary where they defy gender stereotypes but don't feel the need to question their gender. And that is absolutely okay. That is just as real for them. But yeah, I would say that if you're wondering what gender feels like, what does creativity feel like? What does being romantic feel like, right? That looks different for everyone and requires more knowledge of the person to get to know. You could say you're creative, and I could make some assumptions about you, but I would really have to get to know you, Katie, to learn exactly what you mean by that and how your creativity expresses itself. So that's kind of the way I like to describe it.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Hold on.
Yeah, I was looking for some insight from Death, but I believe Serafina may be stepping in.
Yeah. So that's the thing. It's gender isn't even necessarily something that you do feel. A lot of times we feel out its shape just by what it hits and how it feels when it hits it. A lot of people, if you don't have any particular or any strong feeling for a gender at all, then you're not going to notice it so much because there's no obstacles in the way, and there's no carrot, there's no stick. Whereas if you have something inside of you that is set to a particular gender or set of genders, then when you are active in society as the social animals we are, then you are going to come up against that sometimes, and you're going to come up with things that are closer to that, and then you will feel, it's generally considered just generally called a euphoria or a dysphoria. And that is sort of how we feel out the shapes like a radar, just by what pings back to us. I have never felt gender in any direct way. What I've felt is the way that myself, my soul, or whatever you want to call it, responds to being socialized, being treated, referred to, it's seen as, etc., a certain gender. That is what I know, and that's how I've eventually, over many years of denial, figured it out.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's kind of a lot of different angles and ways of looking at it. I'm curious what maybe is resonating for you. Was there anything in any of this that made you think, okay, that's at least an edge that I can start to feel around? Or if it still feels like a total mystery?
Well, I'm thinking I'm just going to have to do some more introspective work. Because, I noticed personally, there are times where I'm perfectly okay with being considered feminine. I'm perfectly okay with she or her. I am never feeling okay with ma'am or lady. I don't really feel comfortable with that. That always feels gross to me.
Well, and it's, I think, important to point out that because gender is such an oppressive or oppressed construct in many parts of our culture, that it becomes difficult to unentangle some of these things. Somebody might call you a lady in the nicest possible way, and it may be still tied to that kind of oppressive environment that you've been experiencing your whole life, which, might mean that you have no problem with the idea of your femininity or your gender or anything else other than just a allergy to oppression. Now, that's me doing a lot of speaking for you, but I just want to acknowledge that those are ideas that are very valid and that a lot of people experience.
That could be part of it. I never even thought of that.
Honestly, you're asking good questions. I would not suspect that this comes from any place other than wanting to learn and grow. And this is an ongoing cultural conversation. So we are going to get this question a lot, and you're asking it in the right way. And if some of this feels like it might resonate for you even a little bit, I'd say maybe poke around a little bit. I loved Serafina's example of radar and kind of what pings back to you. That is a great way to describe that. So maybe send out some feelers and be like, okay, what collection of things make me feel really good about myself? What collection of things don't? And maybe are there words for these? And you know what? A lot of the time there aren't. We don't have a rich cultural lexicon when it comes to this topic, which is why I just call myself queer a lot of the time, because it's the biggest umbrella word to describe me, but there is no specific word for what I am. And sometimes that's okay. I don't necessarily need a word, but just because you're feeling something, that by itself is enough to say, hey, this is what I feel like. How do I describe this? And then just follow from there.
Yeah, it can be a beautiful journey, but it's not a necessary pursuit. Wanting to understand these things about yourself can be, I don't want to cheapen it, but it can be a little bit like a DNA test or an Ancestry.com type of adventure. It might reveal huge, important pieces of your story, and it might really resonate with you, and it may become a really important part of your identity, or it might be something that you're completely uncurious about, and that's okay too.
That's true.
Yeah, well, I hope that gives you some places to start. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I had a foster family that they were Southern Baptist. Very interesting humans. They tried to force me to be more feminine. And now, I've been noticing that, part of me keeps trying to, we're kind of trying to wear things that still appeal to that and do things that still appeal to that. And I'm trying to figure out what parts were forced on me and what parts I actually like.
And that's worth noting too, that being agender is incredibly valid, but oftentimes our inability to experience our gender or to experience all sides of it, or our sexuality, being perhaps bisexual, but being incredibly uncomfortable in homosexual situations is a very, very common response to the heteronormative trauma and pressures of our society. So it sounds like there's a lot of kind of introspection. I'm glad to hear you're sort of spelunking and asking these questions. These are really interesting topics and good questions that you're asking. Just in addition to whatever small tributes we've been able to make, I'd like to point you towards the book How to Understand Your Gender: A Practical Guide for Exploring Who You Are, and I'll make sure to have links to that in the show notes of this episode as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, absolutely appreciate you calling.
And Duff, you.
Whoops. Sorry about that. dropped her a bit early there. But yeah, I think that call ties really well into this next email. And this is actually from a DM that somebody sent me in my personal Twitter. So that's also a place if you would like to get on the show in form of email. I also can pick some of my DMs, so you can find me there too. This is from Spooky Dalai Lama. And they say, I've personally been experiencing a lot of gender dysphoria, and I don't know how to deal with it. My partner has been helping me with my makeup, and it has been causing gender euphoria. I don't consider myself trans, but I don't really understand the Enby identity. If grammar mix up. Am I still a man if I enjoy feminine things and clothing? I love grooming my beard and then painting my nails. I feel like I am Enby, but I'm afraid to admit it. Feels a certain way?
Yeah, Enby, but afraid to admit it, would be basically the band name for most of the people I enjoyed hanging out with in college.
Yep. Sometimes it do be like that. So, what I can say to that. So again, kind of pulling into this ongoing question of what is a non-binary identity, what is gender euphoria and dysphoria, and are those the ways that you find out who you are? And again, I want to go back to Sarah's explanation in terms of radar. I think that if it's okay with you, I'm stealing that. I'm going to be using that to describe this for forever now. But for me, here's the thing. You might, if you are wondering if you are Enby, you might be Enby. I don't know very many cis people who are comfortable in their cisness who have this question, but also you don't need to be Enby to appreciate feminine things. So the one component here that is a little bit of a flag for me that it might be more of you finding a new gender identity as opposed to you breaking out of gender stereotypes is the concept of gender dysphoria and euphoria. And those by themselves make me think it might be more than just, oh, I'm expanding, I'm bringing in some new experiences into my gender that I feel comfortable in. If these things that you are doing make you feel better about who you are, if in some way it makes you feel more seen, that is a really good identifier to the fact that maybe there's something here that needs digging out of. Maybe there's a little bit of deconstruction that needs to happen. But it shouldn't be a scary thing because you're not actually changing anything about yourself. You're just discovering more of who you actually are. And if it changes at some point in the future, then that's how it changes. I don't necessarily like to say I was never cis myself, because I think when I was a teenager, there wasn't one gender that I was. I discovered that this is who I need to be now. But this is not me saying forever and ever, this is what I'm going to be. This is me making a statement about who I am in the moment and what I feel my identity is. So if you want to say, I'm cis-ish, which is what I said for a while, I'm cis-ish, then that's a good start. That's a good jumping off point. If you want to say you're gender queer or you gender bend or some less scary term for you, then that's absolutely okay and you can do that. But I would just say, be open to the idea that things are going to change. And the more you pick at this, the more you dig into this possible other world full of gender euphoria and new things and a supportive partner, which sounds awesome and is great and so necessary, you're going to find yourself changing a little bit. And that's okay. Go at your own pace. Go at the pace you need to go at. And it's fun. It's fun. The only problem is the people who would dismiss us. It's not hard to be Enby. It's hard for other people when you're Enby. Mm-hmm. But it's not something that is painful. It's not something that is shameful. It is liberating and fulfilling in the extreme, for me at least. And it might not be that way for you, right? Maybe there is something that you need to address that maybe does cause pain or discomfort. But you're not going to find out unless you move in that direction. And you can always move back, right? You can always say, oh, this is too far. Maybe I'm out of my depth. Maybe this is not something I want to pursue right now, and move back. And that's fine too. This is all on your timetable. This is all on your comfort zone. So explore, have fun, and see where it leads you.
Yeah, explore, have fun, and see where it leads you. I think that is the most important idea around any of these ideas.
Life is so short, after all. Why would we spend it just running away and trying to find labels? You people like your labels so much, but I tell you that if you follow your euphoria and explore your dysphoria, you will come to a place that is more you, and it doesn't matter what that label is when you get to it, as long as it is you.
Yeah, and if you find euphoria in no label or in a very broad label, that's great too. You know, it's only as interesting as you choose to make it, and that's super valid. So there's a call I'm super excited to take because I have zero input and zero idea on this one. And yet, based on both of y'all's online presence and everything I've ever seen Sarah and V talk about online, I think you're going to be interested to speak to Kevin. So, Kevin, what do you got for us tonight?
Good evening and happy Halloween, everybody.
Hey, you as well. What's on your mind?
So, just starting out, byline I like to go with is that I'm a cis white male who is, as far as I know, heteronormative and neurotypical. So statistically, it's wise not to trust me, but I promise I'm cool. So,
well, we appreciate that, recognizing your privilege while also working to help others.
Yeah, there you go. So I am a staff writer for a gaming company that does a lot of ground-up world building, and the genre we go with is called hope punk. I don't know if anyone has looked up, but look it up in your time. You might like it. What we're doing is we wanted to put together a sort of setting that has societal norms in terms of gender, specifically on gender. That by today's standards would be very progressive, but would be very normal for them, right? So we're trying to navigate that. So I'm hearing a lot of people, even tonight, bringing up some very personal stuff about gender. So I really don't want anyone to think we're trying to make light of anything. What we have is not, what we're trying to do is not like a central theme to the story, the game story we're doing, but we just thought it was like a very rare opportunity to start from the ground up and just portray a very normalized version. Mm-hmm. So, I guess without really touching on how they got there, how the society we're doing got there, I'd be interested in your take on what a world like that would or should look like, particularly in terms of how people would come into their gender, right? Is there parental guidance? Is there just real power in normalizing things and seeing things like that? as somebody grows up, such that it's just not a thing and there's no, angst about it. Whether you just think we do power in normalizing things like that. So do you have any questions about it, or just what do you have, have you thought about this sort of thing?
I love this idea. This sounds awesome. And I am not a gamer, but I would become a gamer if this was a thing. Well, one thing that comes to mind right away are pronouns. If you have a cast of characters and they all use different pronouns, then maybe some of the pronouns are not necessarily intuitive to the way that they look, and everyone's just like, cool, I'm using these pronouns. And it's not even a question. It's just, oh, they, them, ze, zer, he, him, she, her, like making that as diverse and as normal as possible by itself would be huge, because that's one of the big conversations right now, right? Pronouns, and how do we normalize them, and how do we make it so that people who are asking for their correct pronouns don't feel like they're being a bother or being weird. And so making a world where those pronouns are just a normal part of society, and even might be involved in greetings. Hi, my name is V, they, them, or in any way like that, I think would be a fascinating place to start.
Yeah, now that I realize I don't have to understand video games, I'm way more excited to participate in the thought experiment. I think this is a really interesting project that y'all are working on.
Y'all keep having these cool questions and making a great character.
So,
well, what do you got, Sarah?
Well, you can hear you out. What you got to say?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kevin. What were you trying to ask? Let me get out of the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're just trying to take as, I guess scientific's not the right word, but that sort of approach to sort of looking at it from a world building standpoint. So like, I'm not a trained anthropologist. No one on the writing team is either, but it's like you would, we're not doing anything with biological sex. So what we have in this world is the same thing in that world. You know what I mean? So there are those themes of self-identity as a child presumably would grow up in a society like that, but you would still see that level of normalization if you say, okay, yeah, what are your pronouns? Or just come right out with it. That's just a very normalized part of an introduction. Like you said, yeah, that's great. That's a great idea. But, there could also be, do you think there would also be things that would apply along a lot of the sort of anthropological stuff we see nowadays? Like there are in a lot of societies, a typical like rite of passage sort of thing, like a journey into adulthood that would apply to things like that.
Yeah, I recognize this is a little bit of a problematic reference, but when I was a kid, I was in love with a book series by Orson Scott Card, where everybody was given one name at birth, and then later on at various stages in their life, they would sort of change their name, and there'd be a lot associated with that culturally in terms of their profession and these other ideas. And then there was also, everybody I think had three names, sort of the very intimate name that maybe only their parents or their immediate partner would know about. Whereas there was maybe a more like familial or friendly name, and then a more formal name. And I've always been fascinated by that idea. I don't know what it would look like in your construct, but I do like this idea of perhaps approaching babies as agender. And maybe utilizing some sort of generic pronoun when we're talking about somebody who hasn't necessarily developed an identity yet, and perhaps having different mile markers throughout their lifetime where they begin to express their gender and other pieces of their identity as they develop and mature and shift and change and understand and explore themselves.
There are also certain indigenous tribes that used to focus more on occupation and like the role they played in the tribe itself rather than gender. So there would be stereotypes that you would fill, but they wouldn't be gender-based. They would be, this is a hunter, this is a someone who heals, this is someone who talks to the gods, this is like the way that they constructed things was still a role-based society, but instead of saying it's centered around reproduction, it was centered around the various things that individuals could bring to the table.
Kevin, you have like such an opportunity here, and I'm really excited to talk about it. Like you can slip things casually in, overtly, and you can also be really subtle about it. And the things that you can do, I mean, the concept of a gender reveal party where it's actually really the person revealing their gender because they have discovered it.
Experienced it,
yeah, or something along those lines. And even just like the subtle stuff of just like I'm not a believer at all in like the abolition of gender, but the abolition of a lot of the unnecessary gendering in our world and media, just the way you can slip things in that don't have to be so super male role, female role, it's exciting. And I definitely encourage you to work with that, and specifically with like any characters that are background characters or sample characters for initial for when the game starts or anything like that. Anything like that is going to be something you can play with and give all sorts of different options. It's exciting. I'm just excited.
I love that. Yeah, there was I'm sure you've seen this, and then I'll be quiet because I know that you actually need to talk as well, Kevin. I'm just also very excited about this. There is this video of the wireframing that went into like one of the Batman video games, and they switched the characters, but they kept the way that the wireframe moved, and they had Batman like slinking up to like a very stoic Catwoman who was like moving very jaggedly and very sturdily, and then Batman would like fall back, and like it was just the way that the characters were moving. It was so very gendered. So even at the most like kind of mathematical, technical level, making sure that as you're casting these characters and building them just in terms of how they move, that there isn't that dichotomy between how women walk and talk and act and how men walk and talk and act.
Well, I want to make sure not to end this conversation without pointing out that one of our incredible volunteers, Tanjo Wright, said in the chat that our sort of Sweet 16 gender reveal party should be called a Bar Mitzvah Who Are You, which I just love. Take a moment, collect yourselves. And Kevin, was there anything else that you wanted to let us know about this game or for us to weigh in on? Because I'm really excited about it.
Well, COVID has torpedoed our plans of a rollout because there's, it's a live action event. So there's a lot of things we can't do. We're planning to have started already, but we're probably not just going to start at this point until fall of next year. So that's where we're at. But yeah, thanks for bringing all that. And you did bring up something where we didn't really want to touch on anything where we'd land somewhere where what we would call like post-gender. Just we would, but yeah, you've given me a lot of great stuff to roll out. I'm going to be passing this clip around to sort of everybody in my sphere, and hopefully they look at it and see and appreciate what you all think about it. But I'm very lucky to be part of such a great team who we have a lot of great conversations like this. And
yeah, awesome.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, and as you guys develop this, whenever that comes out, be sure to let us know and call in again. I'm sure you'd have a whole base of people just in the live chat right now who'd be very, very happy to purchase this game. Oh,
sure. Well, it's a localized thing. I guess held off as long as I can. It's a LARP for anyone who knows what that is, live action role playing game. So it's very localized to just it's in Western Massachusetts. So it's unfortunately not for for wide distribution. But hey, come out and I can post some stuff up in the chat or the Discord once things are up and running. But send us an email or whatever else. We'd just love to hear about it. It sounds like you're already doing this, but I'd be remiss if I let you go just without pointing out that there's a incredible value in including a diversity of folks on this sort of project. And so let me just encourage your organization to be mindful and seeking and kind of consulting detailed input from folks who experience gender differently than conventional society. Oh, yeah. I mean, we already have, I have a lot of non-binary folks in my, immediate circle, and there's, lots of queer folks around. And so I'd like to think we're very inclusive in that way. Well, glad to hear it. Thanks so much for calling.
Much,
all right. Take care, everybody.
Okay. You too. All right. Sarah, do you have another email for us?
Yes, I am ready to give voice to another one of your emails.
Hit us.
Well, I will eventually, but hey, y'all. I have a concern. A friend is currently transitioning from male to female. 6 months into HRT after a year of gender counseling. Just prior to this, they had been severely suicidal. Their partner is abusive, both mentally and physically, and has managed to isolate my friend. My fear is that they are making a very big decision while living in a traumatic environment. I am very pro-LGBTQ, so my concern isn't their transition. It's the mental health while making these huge decisions. I want to tell them to divorce their partner, get their own place, and let things normalize, then reconsider how quickly they want to move down this path. I have no clue how to approach this. I am your typical hetero white southern male who likes guns and fighting, but I love my friend and I want to support them very well. Speak to this.
I love the position and the concern. I do wonder about the validity of stepping in here. What kinds of concerns do y'all have just around the boundaries here? Because it is a difficult and tricky thing to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm focusing on here is that they've already had a year of gender counseling and are 6 months into hormone therapy. So it doesn't sound like this is a new thing. And it sounds like from what you've said, they've been taking the right steps. They've been responsible. They've talked to a therapist. The therapist has, deemed them, ready to move on to the next phase. So for me, I wouldn't put an immediate red flag up here. But also there have been occasions like the whole Onasun thing that happened the other month, back before we started caring about important things, that brought up some concerns about how abusive partners can influence somebody's gender identity. And we also heard from Katie how her parents and their forcefulness about her gender may have influenced the way she feels about it now. So it's definitely multifaceted, and I do want to make sure that I address that. But also, I don't know, there's something icky feeling to me about focusing on this particular aspect as the thing that would be most detrimental or most concerning. I don't necessarily think you need to worry about the gender part or the transition part as much as you might just want to worry about getting your friend out of a bad situation if you are in that position to do so. So I just basically expressed 5 different viewpoints in the span of 2 minutes. I'm curious what you guys think. Am I on the right track? Did I miss anything here?
Yeah, I think you have the right of it. The gender stuff is worth considering, but it really does feel kind of insignificant in this light of being in such a chaotic and traumatic relationship. Yes, should you be in sort of a safe and healthy place of mind before you make any meaningful, lasting decisions like buying a house or changing jobs? Well, ideally, but that's not really how life works. And so I agree with you, V. This does come down to me more around perhaps the writer's anxiety, and justly so, around watching somebody that they care about be in a abusive situation.
It is understandable and perhaps noble that you wish to take care of your friend who you see as perhaps being in a difficult situation for making large decisions that could be permanent. I understand that. I understand it all, but can you imagine going to your friend and asking them to do something like this? Do you think that it would have a positive reaction in any way?
Mm-hmm.
However, if you are there for them, if you are supportive to them in all of their decisions and there for them when they have difficulties with the traumatic partner and such like that, well then, that is how you can truly help your friend. That is how you can make yourself a good friend.
Yeah, and the boundaries here are really tricky. I don't really talk about this on air often, but for much of my youth, most of it really, depending on how you want to slice that, I was in a very chaotic and eventually fairly abusive relationship. And when I came out of that situation, there was a lot of emotional flailing around, a lot of trying to get my feet under me, a lot of trying to make sense of things. And, perhaps justly or more likely unjustly, a lot of my, or some of my frustration and anger fell to my friends that had known both of us and had sort of watched that situation go on as they had for many years. And rightly or mostly wrongly, I put a lot of pressure on one of my friends in particular. And, as people often do coming out of a situation like that, I found myself relatively quickly in another, like, very unhealthy relationship. And this friend that I had sort of confronted before came to me, and I wasn't able to hear him practically at all. I pretty much shut the conversation down right away, even though he was doing exactly what I had asked him to do. And, I came to my senses fairly quickly and, got healthy and got business taken care of. And perhaps a big part of it was the fact that he was willing to step in and give me that insight, even if at the time I was not paying attention to it, not basing my decisions off of it. So only to say, this is not a circumstance where somebody is going to be super receptive to outside influence, but may be in total need of it. And so when we're talking about safety in an abusive relationship, just know that it's a very difficult conversation to have. There are certainly steps and tools to make that conversation a little bit easier and more responsible, but also avoiding the conversation altogether is kind of the default cultural norm, and it is for a reason. I'm not advocating for that, but I also want to point out that we do tend to do that, and not for nothing. So just be very mindful as you approach all of this.
I was almost waiting for a response. I was like, this wasn't a call. This was an email.
Yeah, little different working with the emails. So with that, if y'all are ready, we can actually jump back into the calls. And I'd be very excited. I know V's going to make fun of me, but I'd like to talk to Dani in New Mexico about hypnosis and kink. Dani, what you got for us?
Hi, can everyone... So, essentially, I have been involved in a lot more online circles of kink recently. And there seems to be a prevalence in the circles that I'm in of hypnosis, and it's a little bit new to me. And so as a skeptic, I was trying to understand and figure out what's actually happening, what is this, and how can I engage in that. And I guess I was kind of wondering if any of you are familiar with hypnosis and kind of what that is in a kink context and how it relates to skepticism.
Yeah, I feel like I've been preparing for this question all month at a minimum, but if not, then probably all year.
Christy, get up.
Yeah. So I should point out that we are actually super excited to say that our episode next week is about this very topic in rather a bit of detail. So we actually are going to be speaking to an erotic audio performer who does a lot of erotic hypnosis type role plays and audio products. So I really encourage you to take a look at that episode where we're going to be diving into this in detail. But without knowing the details of your question or of your concern, I guess I would just let you know that hypnosis is not magic. It's not some people think of it as a special state. And if that is helpful to you, then I say great, just so long as you know that being asleep is also a special state, and there's nothing supernatural about any of this. Hypnosis is really just focusing on particular sensations and experiences. Generally speaking, we're turning that focus inward rather than outward, but just by simply closing our eyes and paying attention to our own thoughts or to our own body in a different way, rather than having our focus be on conversations with other people or on things that we're watching or seeing or thinking about in the future or whatever else. Hypnosis is about taking our focus and applying it directly and very almost narrowly to a very specific thing. It does not involve mind control. It does not involve giving over power of your body or anything along those lines. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And so when you are participating in erotic hypnosis or the sexualization of hypnosis, all you're doing is choosing to focus on a specific idea or a specific mental visual image or a specific aspect of your body or your somatic experience. What kinds of concerns are you having, or what sorts of things are you seeing show up?
Well, I guess a part of it wasn't really understanding. Like, that way of framing it makes a lot more sense for me. It kind of reminds me more of like what headspace is and how I talk about that relating to different headspaces, like a kitty space or a little space or those types of things. And I guess I was thinking about trance less like a headspace and more like, or I guess wondering if there was something more or what people were talking about when they were talking about trance. But I think like the way that you've explained it is helpful for like framing it and understanding it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have ever spent time in meditation, if you've ever spent time in prayer and noticed that your brain was a little tingly or that your physical bodily experience was any different just because of your thoughts, then you've experienced a trance-like motion. You know, everybody listening to this right now can stop what they're doing, hit pause on the recorder, close their eyes, and think about a experience that will make their cheeks feel flushed or a little bit embarrassed or awkward, remembering some, perhaps a shameful moment from their past. Everybody can imagine themselves at a moment where they felt giddy and excited and bring those thoughts to bear on their physical experience. And that's really what we're talking about here. Erotic hypnosis in particular tends to explore sort of role play themes around submission and mind control and these different things. And that's fine. That's fun and great and wonderful, but it's a role play. It's no different than pretending to be a puppy. It can be a really fun experience, but it doesn't make you an animal any more than you already were, right? We're all primates, and yeah, cool. Any other things that the two of y'all might add, or just any other questions, Dani?
Just that, and we're going to talk about this more next week. There's like a cultural stigma around the idea. It's been very sensationalized, the concept of hypnosis, and it's been used in books and in movies and in all forms of media for a very, very long time. And so, of course, hearing about that, especially with the word kink after, which has also been misrepresented quite a bit or just erased, that can be a weird combination of words and might inspire a little bit of hesitation. But as long as you're with somebody who's done their research and knows what they're doing, and you are also, read up and you've called in and we've talked about it, there's no, like Christy said, it's a headspace in the same way that any other kink would be considered a headspace. There's nothing magical going on. You're not going to start balking like a chicken against your will. Like that's all the media and magic shows and college dorm mates having fun. You're still going to be in control of your body. You're not going to be, relinquishing that in a way that is in any way supernatural to a partner.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be assembling a collection of resources, sort of walking through what we understand in the science of what hypnosis is and isn't. What we're describing is just sort of the broad strokes of how to conceptualize these ideas. But it's worth noting that hypnosis is kind of a precursor to modern psychotherapy. Sigmund Freud began to do his research after having experienced hypnosis. And so we've been doing studies on this for a very long time. We continue to be doing all kinds of research studies on hypnotic phenomena. So there is a wealth of data that I think overwhelms and surpasses most more modern and generally accepted types of therapies. So whether we're talking about kink or therapy or whatever else, there's plenty of research to say that yes, hypnosis or trance-like states exist, but certainly not in the way that you're seeing them on TV. So please tune in next week.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Sorry to put the spoiler in, but
yeah, no, jumping the gun a little bit. No, I appreciate you asking a question that I think V secretly suspects I've been waiting for somebody to ask for months and months now.
Or not so secretly, I've known him.
So secretly. And if nothing else, I think it's a great precursor. So I hope that at least a couple of people are a little bit excited, curious, and I hope at least a couple of people are just even maybe a little teensy bit annoyed curious, because I would love to have a detailed conversation about this next week. So thank you so much for bringing it up and for touching base with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. You have a great night. All right. Well, I have just one more email that I would like to get to before we wrap up for the night. Are you all ready?
Yes.
All right. I will say this is fairly cut down just to keep us on track for the night. So let me start kind of here in the middle. As someone who has sold sex, both in ways that are legal in the UK where I live, and also in ways that break the law, I was somewhat disappointed by the way the videos I watched handled the discussion of sex worker rights. The writer here is referring to the series we did in September with Rudy B. and Alice Little and Amberly Rothfield. The writer goes on to say, other people who watched the show discussed the idea of legalization around me, saying they fully supported sex work and making it legal and regulated. Given that both in the UK and the US, the vast majority of sex worker rights organizations want decriminalization because it's notably safer for sex workers, I was disappointed that the show had that particular impression on them. So this is in response to a conversation we had about either legalization or decriminalization of sex work. And frankly, having thought about this since that conversation, I feel that I, for one, got the idea a little bit wrong. So let me invite the two of y'all to jump in a little bit and give whatever take feels right to you.
I think we're both waiting for the other one to go first. Sarah, would you like to jump in?
I got nothing.
Yeah, well, no, that's totally fair.
You stumped death. This must make you immortal, right? Like if
Right?
you stump death, then
Yeah,
you do not
actually, I feel
You
like
officially
I've read
get to
that
come back to
story.
life now.
Cool. All right.
I'm excited to hear what you've learned, Christy. I know that I learned a lot about sex work from the September sex work series. And I've engaged very briefly on conversations about the difference between legalizing and decriminalizing, especially as it pertains to other things like drugs. But I'm curious about the nuances of kind of what you've discovered as you've worked through this.
Yeah, well, I don't mean to slow roll the setup, but the truth is, I even said in my response email to this writer that as soon as I like kind of listened back to the tape and recognized the way that I had addressed a version of this question a couple of months ago, it stuck with me. Because while I didn't say anything I don't still believe or agree with, I really didn't give a nuanced understanding of the argument. So to do that now to some extent, I'll effectively say that I do, on paper, really support the idea of sex work legalization, of creating a system of licensure, of training, of making sure that sex workers are both unionized and protected, but that also their clients are protected. And I think that there is incredible value in that idea in some sort of like utopian society that definitely doesn't exist on Earth. I think it's a little Pollyanna-ish to believe that that is the best way to protect our sex workers in the here and now. So to that end, decriminalization would allow sex workers to continue what they're doing without having all of the incredible pressure and discrimination that they experienced from the law, as well as from other people and businesses and all of these kinds of things. It's certainly a nuanced position, and I want to recognize that these are complicated ideas, and frankly, that there are ideas we would like to be doing a better job of discussing this on this show. We have worked to find a expert or a representative from a sex workers union or a sex workers rights lobby, and just haven't necessarily met the right person to have that conversation. But it's an important one to be looking into. And maybe there's somebody listening tonight that would be willing to give up an evening of their time and walk us through some of the complexities of these ideas. So that's it for me. That's me kind of walking back something we said in the past, while also recognizing that these are really complicated ideas, and that there is a lot of oppression on the sex worker community. And I hope we highlighted that effectively in some of the work that we did back in September. But there's a lot more to acknowledge, including the fact that many, if not perhaps most, sex workers actually do operate outside the law and experience incredibly high rates of victimhood. That's not universal. I don't mean to say in the least bit that sex work is inherently dangerous. I will say that there are a lot of vulnerabilities in that population, and it concerns me. So I appreciate y'all taking the time to kind of help clear the mailbag. I know we've got just a few more left in here that we may hold on to for a rainy day. But also to say to the audience, we would love to be getting more mail. We've got a couple of opportunities coming up as the holidays approach, and we would love to be listening to your voicemails. We'd love to be reading your messages, whether that's through email or through the Facebook fan group, through any of these other platforms and ways of getting a hold of us. I mean, track V down on Twitter. Track Serafina down at a funeral. Like, wherever you can find us, we want to hear what you have to say and what you're curious about.
And as always, can we get the crew cam up here so we can look at the lovely people who hypnotize us every week
Hypnotize, mesmerize.
with their massive amounts of technology skills. Yeah, if you're interested in reaching out and getting in touch, we have a myriad of ways in which you can do that. We also have a Discord and Twitter at Secular Sex. And you really, if you're stuck inside and maybe feeling a little lonely this holiday season, because this holiday season can be a little bit tricky for us anyway, and now with COVID, it might get even a little bit more depressing. We're going to be here. We're going to be making sure that we are on your screens on Thursday. So do us a favor, send along a message so we can communicate with y'all.
All right. Well, with that, we are definitely looking forward to seeing each of you next week. But whether it's hypnotically or in a live action role play, whether you are in costume or alive or dead, I think we want to encourage everybody out there to go and give themselves a big ol' orgasm. Or, better yet, give somebody else one.
The French call orgasm little death.